We're discussing the Keystone XL pipeline at Climate One at the Commonwealth Club with Cassie Doyle, Consul General for Canada in San Francisco. We also have Jason Mark, an editor at the Earth Island Institute, Carl Pope, Chairman of the Sierra Club, and Alex Pourbet, President of Energy and Oil Pipelines at TransCanada. I'm Greg Dalton. Alex, you've been wanting to jump in here both on the number of emissions and also sort of the baseline that oil sands relative to other types of petroleum. Do you agree that they're dirtier than conventional crude?
Well, it's always a question of degree, Greg. And I think, you know, interestingly, we were just talking about the CIRA report. Well, you know,
Cambridge Energy Research Associates.
Cambridge Energy Research Associates is one of the most respected energy research firms in the world. And the great news is that all of you here, I just heard from Greg that Dan Yergin, who is the chair of CIRA, is actually going to be speaking. So everyone here will get the opportunity to ask him himself what he thinks of it. But in their most recent study, one of the things that there's a number of ways that our opponents use to exaggerate the greenhouse gas intensity of the oil sands. Number one is this issue of wells to wheels versus wells to refinery gate. It is a fact that anywhere between 80 and 90% of the greenhouse gas related to a barrel of oil does not come from the production and refining of it. It comes through the combustion of the refined products in the automobiles or at the tailpipe. So right off the bat, we're talking about a fraction. We're arguing about a percentage of a fraction. You know, when you think about what happens if Canadian oil, no more Canadian oil is allowed to get to refineries in the U.S. Gulf Coast. Those refineries spent tens of billions of dollars to configure themselves so that they could run these heavier crudes. These heavier crudes are cheaper. If Canadian oil does not get to them, they will source heavy crudes elsewhere in the globe, and you will get the same emissions being produced worldwide. The other comment I would make is there is a big difference between assuming that by stopping Keystone XL, you're going to stop the development of the oil sand. If the U.S. market were to be closed off for incremental barrels of Canadian oil, it is not a fair assumption to assume that the people in the oil sands will stop developing that crude. They'll continue to develop and produce that crude. They'll do it reliably and they will do it conscientiously, but it will go to other markets. And you know, the globe and the atmosphere does not respect borders.
Carl Pope, let's have you respond to a couple of points there. One, that the refineries will get crude oil from somewhere, that this Alberta oil will find a market somewhere. And number three, demand is the problem. It's all of our cars that create the demand for this stuff. We're the problem.
Well, let's look at some of the numbers, because if you look at the impact of tar sands oil versus other sources, you were saying, well, it's not a big part of Canada's total energy, carbon emissions, but that's not including the result of consuming it. You were saying it's not that much more a percentage because you're including the well to wheel. So the reality is that there's enough conventional crude. If we burned all the conventional crude that there is in the world, we would fry the planet. If we burn all the conventional crude plus a lot of unconventional crude, we doubly fry the planet. We really can't afford to become dependent on this much oil. You're right, the issue is demand. But it is not necessarily the case that the only way to change course is just to go after demand. We're going after demand. Canada's going after demand. I think this is a bad project from a bad industry from a fundamentally good country. I want to be clear. I don't want to trash Canada. We're not so great. But what we discovered was once you build these facilities, once you build this infrastructure for an oil-dependent economy, it's much more expensive to move off of an oil-dependent economy. Tar sands oil basically doesn't make economic sense unless the price of oil is north of $80 a barrel. The world cannot afford to continue to produce huge volumes and consume huge volumes of $80 a barrel of oil. That will make Alberta rich. It'll make Saudi Arabia rich. It'll make North Dakota rich. It'll make Alaska rich. It'll make Venezuela and Kuwait rich. But it will impoverish the rest of the world. in that Canada needs to be developing an economy that is not dependent for the next 5 decades on the growth of the tar sands industry, because if the tar sands industry goes for the next 5 years, Canada's permafrost will all melt. We cannot afford in the United States to have Canada give us another fix, and this is another fix for our addiction to oil.
I mean, Alex, I just simply don't understand this argument that, well, if we don't take it, someone else is going to take it, so therefore we should take it. I mean, that's not the question on the table. The question is really, is the United States going to be complicit in burning megatons more of carbon dioxide that is going to fuel runaway climate change? I mean, if the Chinese want to jump off the atmospheric version of the Golden Gate Bridge, that doesn't mean we have to jump off the bridge as well. I mean, I just don't get it. This is what the choice here facing Americans, Alex, is fundamentally, do we want to be consuming more oil? And I agree with you. I don't want to get, lost in the weeds on a conversation about the fractions of a percent. The question really, as Carl said, is do we continue to make investments that leave us on the path of a carbon-intensive economy? Or when do we start to make the decisions? When do we make the hard decisions that say we are going to stop using oil, or we're going to decrease our dependence on oil? And this is one of those litmus tests. This is one of those places where we draw the line in the sand. We say we have to start someplace. And the place to start is by saying no to the Keystone XL pipeline. Because otherwise we just keep postponing the future. Oh, we'll eventually get around to decreasing our dependence on oil. This is a place where we say, nope, we're going to make a U-turn and start pursuing a clean energy economy.